Good afternoon. Welcome to you all. How lovely to see you all here. So my name is Sarah Morris, and I'm the author of 2 books about Anne Boleyn. Le Temps Viendra, a novel of Anne Boleyn. Le Temps Viendra meaning in French, the time will come. Words written by Anne's very own hand in her Book of Hours, and you can still see that today in Heath Castle. And the second book is a non-fiction book. It's a guidebook about all the places and artefacts associated with Anne Boleyn. And this is my lady-in-waiting for the day. This is a Zarina Bull, a Lady Zarina. Lady Zarina trained at the London College of Fashion, where she did theatre costume. And as a result of her love of costume and all things Tudor, in fact, everything you see here today is made with Lady Zarina's very own hands. Oh, all hand stitched. They were quite amazing. And you'll have lots of chance to chat with Zarina and I later about our relative passions and interests. So yes, as a result of Lady Zarina's interest in Tudor costume and Tudors, she set up her own business called Tudor Gowns about 18 months ago. So she makes bespoke Tudor clothing for all your tutoring needs. As I say, we'll both be around later to talk to you about books and about Tudor clothes should you wish to find out more. But you might be thinking, how on earth did we come here to be talking about what's going on under a lady's skirts today? Well, for me, it started with the research of Le Temps Viendra. I'm not a professional historian, so when I set out to write the book back in August 2010, I actually confess I knew very little about the Tudors. I had a lifelong passion for Anne Boleyn, but I needed, what was really important for me from the beginning was historical accuracy. I really wanted to make history real. So I set about doing as much research as I could about all the different facets of Anne's world. So how the Tudors would reverence one another, how they would hawk, hunt, dance, eat, the great castles and palaces that they lived in, but also, of course, how they dressed. Now, I don't know, some of you may be experts on Tudor costume, I don't know, but certainly when I set out writing LTV, I knew what a Tudor lady looked like, but it was a bit of an enigma of actually what happened and how it was all put together and what the different layers of the costume was about. So I began to do some reenactments, and this is where I met Lady Zarina, who was also following her passion. And as we promenaded around wonderful houses like this, we were constantly stopped by people who were asking us about our costume and going, what was going on under all these layers? So we thought we'd put together what I hope will be for you. It will be about 40 to 45 minutes of a very visual, very entertaining talk, I hope, where you get a chance to be a fly on the wall in a lady's raying chamber. Raying chamber is the Tudor name for a dressing chamber, essentially. And you'll be able to see exactly how a Tudor costume is put together and sculpted into place. So that's a little bit about us. What I wanted to say, first of all, though, is a slight disclaimer. We're not professional costumiers, historical costumiers. We're just very passionate amateurs, and we're going to share that with you today. The other thing that muddies the water a little bit with Tudor costume, in being able to say, you know, this is exactly how they dressed at this time, is that Tudor fashion, of course, was changing all the time, just like fashion today. So you can see, for example, very significant differences between Tudor fashion at the beginning of the 16th century and the end of the 16th century. But exactly when a farthingale changed its shape or a petticoat was cast aside in favour of a different garment is a little bit more difficult to pinpoint. The other thing that tends to complicate things is a little like today. I mean, we have jumpers, sweaters, pullovers, don't we? It's essentially 3 words for all the same thing. Well, the Tudors had the same thing going on, and so if you try to look back at the the wardrobe accounts, you might often see, for example, a gown being called a kirtle or a kirtle being called a petticoat. So when you look at the primary sources and try to work out exactly what a Tudor lady would be wearing, you have to try and unfathom all this and make the most of all the different sources. So just so we cover all the ground, when we're trying to make sense of Tudor clothing, we're looking, of course, at extant portraits, items of Tudor clothing which still survive from the 16th century. Tomb effigies are also a good source of information. And then, of course, you have the royal wardrobe accounts as well. So this is where we tend to draw all our bits and pieces from. So, we're about to start, but let's create a little bit of ambience. Here we are in this wonderful house, the Vine. It is actually, Serena and I were just feeling quite touched by this, it is 478 years ago, to this very day, that Anne Boleyn arrived at the Vine at the side of Henry VIII. They were on progress, the royal progress in 1535. It had been one of the longest and most politically significant progresses of Henry's reign. It's been jolly, really, for 2.5 months. They've been hunting and hawking daily, being entertained by all the sort of nobility and gentry around Oxfordshire, Gloucestershire. They've travelled through much of Hampshire, and they arrived here on Friday the 15th of May in 1535. Of course, they were guests of Lord William Sandys, who was a very important man at the Tudor court. He was Henry's Lord Chamberlain. A Lord Chamberlain was the Tudor nobleman, I should say, women didn't have such important roles, who was responsible for all the goings-on in the King's Privy Chamber, as opposed to the public chambers. And the Vine, a beautiful house today, but much bigger in 1535. So it was a big courtyarded house, much of it on the lawn, just outside there. So the foundations to a lot of the house, of course, are now lost. A courtyard house was very typical of the Tudor era, and the King and Queen would have occupied their respective sides whilst they were here. And I think it's believed, that ladies from the Vine will confirm it to me, but I think the Long Gallery is thought to have connected potentially the King and the Queen's sides. That still survives with us today. So let the 21st century just dissolve away for a moment and take yourself back to 1535 on the Queen's side. Anne Boleyn is getting ready for a day at court. So you're going to see how a typical Tudor noblewoman at the pinnacle of Tudor society would be dressed on an everyday basis. We're in her raying chamber. She's attended by her lady-in-waiting, probably more than one. And the ladies-in-waiting were usually married women who were also wives of the nobility and close personal friends of the Queen, so they attended her at her most intimate tasks. And you find me here in my Tudor nightgown. So I suppose you would call, this is sort of similar to a modern day dressing gown, essentially. This gown would have been worn very informally, usually within the privy chambers. It's very comfortable to wear. Believe me, when you're wearing one of these all day and you've been laced into it all day, to get into a lovely flowing gown like this is just sheer relief. This beautiful gown, as you can see, is made of, it's black, lady, black.
It's black satin on the outside and then black taffeta on the inside.
Thank you, my lady. And fur-lined around the collar. Now, most of us wouldn't dream of being painted for our portrait in our dressing gown, I imagine. Is that correct? the greatest painter in the world, in the land, turns up at your door and you decide to be painted in your dressing gown. This is exactly what we see with Anne Boleyn here. A Holbein sketch of Anne. She's wearing, I hope you see, not a dissimilar piece of clothing to you see me wearing here. She has her coif upon her head. You see her smock, which we'll come to in a moment, fastened at the base of her neck. And then you see this lovely, full, voluminous garment that she's wearing, which is trimmed with fur around the collar, much as you see me. I have heard it said that the reason Anne Boleyn would have sat in something like that was that the garment was a very prized piece of clothing for her. Perhaps it had been a gift, maybe a gift from Henry himself. And in fact, if you read the wardrobe accounts, there is an account of Anne Boleyn receiving material of black silk and taffeta to be made into a nightgown when she was at Eltham Palace with Henry in 1532, just prior to their monumental trip to Calais. So, yes, so here we have our nightgown, and you may, thank you.
Mistress likes to send a manservant for your hood.
Ah, yes, please.
Yes. Over there.
Could you collect, in the room, could you collect my hood? It's in a box. Ah, oh, that's cooler. I hope I'm looking reasonably modest here. I have to say, if you see a peak of underwear, that's because I'm just doing it for modesty. Of course, Tudor ladies didn't have any underwear as far as we know. No knickers. And so this would be the basically the closest layer next to their skin or underwear. And it's made of linen, and it is said that in the 16th century everybody came into the world dressed in linen and everybody went out of the world dressed in linen, which basically means that babies were swaddled in linen for the first few months of their life, quite a long time actually, and the dead were always wrapped in linen before they were buried. So in between, whether you were a man or a woman, whether you were a peasant working in the field or whether you were the king or queen themselves, you would wear copious amounts of linen. But what marked out your status was how much linen you owned, how often you could change that. Your chemise, I should say, your smock, your chemise, or your shift, which are all the same name for this particular item of clothing that you see me here. As queen, I would be wearing a very fine, soft linen against the skin. Obviously, I'd be able to change my linen on a daily basis. Not so, of course, if you were a peasant working in the field. Now, a smock could be plain, as you see me wearing here today, or it could be beautifully embroidered. So these are actually still survivors from the 16th century, isn't that just wonderful? And they're in the Museum of Bath, and you can see that they're completely embroidered over over the bodice, around the collar and on the cuffs, with what's called black work. So that means it's embroidery with black thread, and you get that fantastic close. I love the little bee in the corner, it's fantastic. Equally popular would be embroidery with red thread, and that would be called red work. But there's accounts of all sorts of coloured silks being used. And if you were Anne Boleyn, then certainly you would be most familiar with having your smocks embroidered with gold or silver thread. In fact, we see this here, if I just go forward, in Catherine Parr. Now this is actually from the 1540s, but if you look at her cuffs, look very carefully, you can see some golden embroidery, and undoubtedly that's golden thread used to embroider her smock. In fact, we can see here a different type of neckline. You can see I've got a square cut neckline. Here in the 1540s, it's a good example of how garments have evolved. This is a slightly different style of dress which wasn't really available in or hadn't kind of come into being in the 1530s I should say. This kind of raised collar, and we can see the raised collar of the smock, which is complementing the gown. If we go back, you'll see again the little collar here, and that would be quite often worn, for example, with an English gown, which I'll come and tell you all about as we go on through the talk. And then, of course, I have this square cut neckline, and that's very much determined by the type of outer gown that I'm going to wear. So, as you see with Lady Zarina here, you can see her smock above the neckline, and then the square cut neckline sort of complements that. So you know, you had a different design. Now, why did you wear an item such as this? Well, first and foremost, it protected the skin against the outermost layers of your clothing. But as Lady Zarina and I are well aware from our days doing reenactment during hot summer English sunshine, is that you do tend to perspire quite a lot. And the beauty about being able to wear a smock like this is that the perspiration is absorbed. And so you can wash it, basically. And of course, it's very difficult, in fact impossible, to wash some of these fine materials that made up the outer gown without damaging them. So the way Tudors tended to deal with their outermost clothing is they'd brush them down, they'd scent them, but you'd never think to wash this, but you could wash your linen. So that's the smock, or the shift. Underneath that you can see I've got my Tudor stockings or my hose on with where's my little garter still there? And we know that they did wear garters. I don't have a picture of that, but Eleanor of Toledo's coffin, she was the Duchess of Florence in the mid-16th century, and when her coffin was opened by the Italian authorities, they found her wearing red stockings with little silk red garters with them. So most of the stockings, I believe, certainly in the early 16th century were woolen, but although I think there's accounts of Elizabeth I later on in the century having silk stockings, obviously the height of fashion and opulence. And then on my little feet here, I've got my Tudor shoes, slippers, as they were called in the Tudor period. So there's actually not much information about Tudor shoes and slippers if you look in the wardrobe accounts. I've seen it said that Henry VIII had velvet slippers, silk slippers, but what we do know is that they did in England wear their slippers flat, whereas on the continent you would more often have a heel associated with your shoe. So that's my undergarments. Now the next layer, I'm actually not going to physically put on today because we've got 3 layers of lacing to do and we'll be here all day if we put on every single layer, but I am going to tell you all about it. So the next layer is, if I just move on, oh, that's Anne Boleyn just modelling the square cut neckline. And as you can see, hers is embroidered with that black work again that I was talking to you about. Oops, and then we have also the Tudor slippers. So this is a sketch by Holbein. It beautifully demonstrates the front and the rear of a Tudor French gown, and then you can just see the little slipper poking through the bottom, then that typical square sort of rounded end that we so associated with Tudor footwear. And hopefully that will take us onto our bodies. So the next layer that a Tudor lady would wear would be her pair of bodies, also known as bodies, also known as stays. So again, we have this complication of 3 different words describing exactly the same article. The purpose of a pair of bodies or stays was basically to provide definition to the bodice. Now in the early 16th century, it's not like the corsets we've come to know associated with the Tudor period, not the Victorian period, that were highly boned and meant to clinch in the waist to the smallest waist possible. That's really not what Tudor stays were about. They were just about providing definition, particularly to the décolletage. So once you're laced in, and here is an example of a stays that Serena has made, once you're laced in you get this lovely flat front, and the intention is that the breast is pushed up so you get that rather raised décolletage that we might associate. I was going to get Serena to model the you see what I mean? Now this particular pair is backlaced. Let's turn it round so you can see the back lacing on it. This particular pair has been backlaced, but as you can see over here on the slide, on the left-hand picture, you have stays from the funeral effigy of Elizabeth I. So a bit later on in the period, but front-laced in this instance. Both of them have tassets, which are these sort of mouldings that allow the stays to just sort of skim across the hips, providing greater comfort for the wearer. And then we have over on the right there another example of a backlacing pair of bodies or stays. Again, these were taken from the coffin of Eleanor of Toledo. They're made of red velvet in this instance. And that reminds me to talk to you about red just briefly. Red was an incredibly popular colour for Tudor ladies' undergarments. So they had stockings in red, they had stays in red, they had petticoats in red. I have heard it said that it was because red was thought to have a highly beneficial health effect. So there you go. Get wearing red, ladies, and we'll all be fine. So yes, I think that's all I need to say about the stays, except that what would commonly be the case is around the waistline they might have had loops from which they would attach a petticoat. So the other function of the stays was to hold a petticoat up, and again, very often a red petticoat. So those are the stays, and I think with that I'm probably ready for the next layer. So this would be a farthingale. So you have to imagine me my stays and my petticoat, and now I'm going to step into my farthingale.
Madam, you may put this over your head.
A lady always allows her ladies to dress her. The history of the farthingale, I don't know how many of you know that it came into England in 1501 with Catherine of Aragon, when she came across to marry Prince Arthur. Her and her ladies came across with their Spanish farthingales, got here and realised nobody was wearing them. So they ditched them straight away to begin with, in favour of the long flowing skirts that kind of hugged and skimmed the body, which were the fashion of the time. However, at some point, clearly Catherine decided she wanted her farthingale back before she readopted it and started to wear it again. And of course, the Queen was wearing that, so it became fashionable. And so the Spanish farthingale came into English costume. Clearly, its main role is to provide definition and shape to the skirts. When it was first adopted, it was perhaps more modest in size than this, so the skirts still remained relatively a narrow sort of cone shape, and then as the decades progressed, the farthingale became more voluminous, and therefore the definition of a lady's skirts became more voluminous. And here we see the shape of the skirt of, this is Princess Elizabeth, from the mid-1540s, and by this time the farthingale was quite stiff, and it gave these sort of stiff conical skirt shape. Just go forward a minute. No, come back a minute. The train, which we'll also talk about when we get to talk about the gown, which was popular in the 1530s, had disappeared by that time, so the skirts were just this sort of cone shape. In terms of materials, what you're seeing here is quite commonly appears in the wardrobe account. So you hear of sort of silks, and you hear of red velvet. Again, red comes up quite a lot. So I think I'm probably ready for my next layer. And the next layer is a very confusing layer of clothing, I think, to the uninitiated. It took me quite a long time to figure out how this fitted into the wardrobe of a Tudor noble lady. But this is the kirtle. I'll just step into it for a moment, and then I'll start telling you all about it.
Stepping in the farthingale.
Thank you. So, the reason I think that it's a bit confusing as a gown, this is, as you can see, is front fastening, so I'm just going to have to try for all of you can see me and talk to all of you while Serena starts lacing up. So the reason I think that the kirtle is a little bit confusing as an item of clothing is because in the 15th century, the kirtle was actually the outermost gown worn by a lady, and I'm just going to have to lean across. So if you see the picture there on the right-hand side, if you could just move back so this lady can see. Thank you. If you look at the picture on the right-hand side, you'll see a lady. She's clearly not a noble lady. She's working. She looks like she's making the bed to me. But she's wearing a sort of a kirtle of the 15th century. It was a typical type of gown of that era. It was close-fitting around the shoulders and the bodice. There was a seam around the waist, and then the skirts fell away in quite a natural fold. And that's, I believe, how it was through most of the 15th century. Then at some point, during the 16th century, the Tudor nobility thought, no, we're not having that. We need another layer of opulence. And so the kirtle became the second most outer gown, and either the English or French gown, which I'll be talking to you about in a moment, superseded it and became the outermost external layer of clothing. So the kirtle, which in the 15th century was very often called a gown, very much became a kirtle, and the French and English gown became the gown. Am I making any sense here? It can be a little bit confusing. So you can see here I'm actually being laced up at the front, and indeed kirtles could be laced up at the front. And in fact, if I was a peasant working on the land, it would be absolutely essential, because I need to be able to do up my own clothing. One of the things that becomes very apparent as soon as you start wearing Tudor noble ladies' clothing is you can't get into it yourself. You actually absolutely need somebody to lace you in. And hence that was all a matter of wealth and status, of course. So yes, I'm being, and then normally at this point we tend to sort of heave our bosoms into place so that we get the appropriate décolletage, but I'm going to save you that spectacle and just keep going as I am. So I was saying that the kirtle evolved and became, we're getting in the way of this lady. The kirtle evolved as the 16th century dawned, and here we see Mary Tudor over on the right. Now, on the outermost layer, she's wearing something called an English gown, which I'll talk to you about in a moment. But underneath that, and you can see it from her elbows to her cuffs, and in the front of her skirt, that would be her kirtle, her second most outer layer. Well done, thank you very much. Now I'm wearing this lovely sort of crimson satin, which is beautiful and a really rich fabric, and certainly wouldn't be available to the everyday Tudor Tudor person. But it actually, for a kirtle, it's not embellished, and you'll see the reason for that in a minute, because when I put on my outer gown, this layer, in this instance, is not going to be visible. So it doesn't have to be a rich and ornate fabric that we see here. That must be probably some kind of cloth of black gold that Mary's wearing, which would be incredibly expensive, but was all part of the show. So, just let me know, I think I'm going to get into in a moment. So yes, so all of this is going to be covered up in a moment, and because of that, because when you see my friend, if you see Zarina, Lady Zarina here, she has this deep V slit in her gown. This would either be a kirtle, or in this case, I'm going to wear my forepart, because I need that part of my skirt. It's going to be visible, so it needs to be beautiful, rich material that's going to be on display. So this is a lady's forepart. You can see it's just a simple, this triangular piece of material, but always as rich and as opulent as you could afford it. So this is a kind of silk damask, my lady?
Silk brocade.
Silk brocade. And we see here, again, I just flicked onto it before, we've got another close-up from a portrait of Mary Tudor again, and here you can see the forepart of her skirt. And critically, the forepart always matched the material of the false sleeves. So you can see her false sleeves peeking out from the elbow to the cuff. And as I continue to get dressed, you'll see me actually put on my false sleeves, and you'll see how the two pieces of material actually tally up. So having put my forepart in place, I'm now ready for the gown. This is a bit of a monster to dive into, so I'm going to have to leave you for a second while I disappear. Now this is quite a heavy gown because it's autumn outside, it's a little bit more chilly. So as the Queen, I'm going to be wanting to pick something that's going to keep me warm throughout the day. So this is made out of beautiful velvet, and the sleeves are trimmed with fur. Not awfully elegant. Oops. There we go. Point was just coming off. There we go. Good. So whilst my lady sets about lacing me in, hello. Sorry, you missed the first few layers. I should just do a quick recap. So let me talk to you about gowns. A Tudor noble lady had two basic styles of gown to choose from. The first was the English gown. And I must admit, when I came to learn about the Tudors, I didn't really I always thought of the French gown, but I didn't really have the picture of the English gown in my mind. So this was a bit of a revelation for me at the time. So the English gown, as you can see, we've got Christina of Denmark on the left-hand side. She's only about 16. It's a portrait commissioned by Henry VIII when he was casting around Europe looking for his new bride. And it's Christina, such a spirited girl, who said, yes, I'd gladly give the King of England my hand in marriage if only I had two heads. So, yeah, she certainly had her head literally screwed on the correct way. So here we see Christina of Denmark in an English nightgown. It's a bit like the nightgown that you saw me wear at the beginning of the talk. The point about the English gown is it's close-fitting around the shoulders, and then it falls away in just one swathe of fabric to the ground in sort of fairly, in this instance, quite loose folds. As you can see, like the nightgown I was wearing, Christina's gown is trimmed with fur. It is just possible it was lined with fur if it was winter, and you really did need, obviously, that extra warmth. And you have these beautiful voluminous sleeves which are caught in at the cuff. As the century wore on, the English gown evolved in style. So So here on the right-hand side, you've got a picture of, from about 1570, I think this is. So it's a contemporary drawing. Draw your attention to the ladies, particularly on the left, the two ladies. They're both wearing English gowns. It's a bit different though, they're obviously more fitted around the bodice, but they're still falling away in one straight cut of fabric to the ground. The English gown was always fastened at the front, and the fastening was clear and obvious. So it was fastened with a piece of ribbon, as you see with Christina of Denmark, or probably on the other one, fastened with hooks and eyes. The French gown, as we may see as we come to one of the other slides, was fastened normally at the back in the 1530s, but could be fastened down the side or at the front. But in that instance, you'd always put an extra layer of fabric called a stomacher across the front to hide the lacing. So you would never see the lacing on the front of a French gown. Just to say also, you've got these different sleeve styles coming in with the English gown. So they could be puffed, as you see with Christina of Denmark, or they could be just sort of long-fitting all the way, fairly close-fitting to the arm, right through to the cuff, as you see with one of those ladies there, or just this short puff that finishes at around the elbow. And beneath, it's another good picture that shows how the kirtle could be visible beneath an English gown. So you can see how, particularly the second lady in from the left, you can see that lovely, some kind of damask or brocade material showing through the front slit of her gown. So there is no evidence that this gown, although it looks more comfortable than this gown, there's no evidence that the English gown was used informally. So I'll just talk you through gasps. It was very much a formal gown, and so certainly would have been something that you could have chosen to wear, at court and be perfectly acceptable to do so. And then we move on to the French gown, which is perhaps the gown we all associate, or I think most people associate with the Tudor period. It's certainly the gown that you're seeing me being laced into here. I don't know exactly when the French gown came to England, but one imagines that Mary Tudor, sister of Henry VIII, who became the Queen of France, I know she's credited to have brought the French hood to England, so I suspect she managed to bring a gown with her as well. And no doubt when Anne Boleyn became Henry VIII's paramour and then consort, she certainly popularised the French fashions and was very much known for her French ways. And here we see two more of Henry's queens. We've got Jane Seymour, of course. If we're really fed up, it's a great therapy. It's exact revenge. So we've got Jane Seymour over on the left-hand side there, and of course Catherine Parr on the right. And they're both wearing slightly different variations of the French gown, but essentially the same basic costume with the very tight fitting around the shoulders, around the bodice. You have a waist seam, as you see here, and then the skirts falling away with that deep centred V down the front and the forepart or the kirtle visible. I suppose the main difference, perhaps, between these two pictures is Catherine, the sleeves are starting to evolve, and I'll talk to you a little bit about the evolution of the sleeve. You might just notice, that Catherine's Parr sleeves are just starting to get a little bit bigger, and they became a little bit more voluminous through the 1540s and stiffened. And as I say, I'll talk to you a little bit more about that as we go along. So here I am in my chocolate brown velvet. Is that what you say?
Yes, I would say chocolate.
With my fur sleeves. Now, of course, what you wore in the 16th century was who you were, essentially, and vice versa. So today, people often try to dress as individuals so that they can be different. Well, in Tudor society, you dressed so that everybody would know exactly who you were in Tudor society. So, of course, there were the sumptuary laws, which were reinforced by the Tudors, or they tried to anyway. I think most people blatantly ignored them. But this determined what you were able to wear according to your rank. So you could only wear silk, for example, if you were an earl or above, so an earl, a marquess, or a duke, or the king, or the queen. The royal family were the only people permitted to wear crimson, scarlet, purple. So if you were a Tudor, you would know exactly somebody's status when they walked through the door by what they were wearing. The other thing that determines what I might wear during the day as the Queen is, of course, the climate and what the season is, and I alluded to that earlier. So I am wearing a heavier gown of velvet and fur, but in the summer, as Lady Zarina and I know, it's much more comfortable if you're wearing your silks and your satins and your taffetas with maybe your velvet sleeves folded back. And of course the Tudors were in the midst of a mini ice age as well. The temperatures were sort of 2 to 3 degrees cooler than they are today. And they lived outdoors. You know, we spend so much time indoors watching telly, on the computer or whatever we do. Of course, in researching... You're killing me, Lady Zarina. I need some breath left to talk. You've done a marvellous job, thank you. In researching in the footsteps of Anne Boleyn, we've done a whole section on the 1535 progress. And it's fascinating to see the accounts of what they did, but essentially almost every single day they seemed to be out hunting and hawking. From morning till after the sun had gone down. So there's wonderful accounts that survive from their time in Gloucester on this very same progress, 1535 progress, where they went out. They spent all the day hunting around the Gloucestershire countryside, stopping at local gentry along the way. And then when they got back to the city gates of Gloucester, it was after dark, and they were met by torchbearers and taken back to their lodgings. So they were out for hours and hours. So you needed to dress appropriately, certainly. I'll just make sure I haven't missed anything here. Oh, I just wanted to talk to you about the train. Yes, that's absolutely right. So I mentioned that at the beginning of the 16th century, certainly up until the 1530s, it was quite common for a lady to have a train. I've got the tiniest, but not really on this one. But as you can see here, this is, again, I'm going back to Eleanor of Toledo. The richness came out when they opened her coffin. This was the dress that she was dressed in. It's thought to be her wedding dress, actually. And there is actually a picture of Eleanor of Toledo in this very dress, which is why they managed to marry the two up. But we can see here beautifully this little train. But in England, certainly, the train had disappeared by the end of the 1530s. And there we go. And so I suppose the last thing I wanted to talk to you about on the gown is just to go back and talk about the different layers and about the type of material. So this slide shows beautifully all the different layers we've been talking about. So if you look carefully, you can see a very thin, transparent sort of chemise just scooping around the base of her neck. So that's another kind of style, if you like, of neckline. And then the red layer that you see there, I'm interpreting that as probably being her stays, her red velvet stays. And then the black being the kirtle, fastened up the front. And then you have this final layer of the grey damask. And if you look really carefully, you'll see fur coming up from the neckline. Can you see the little threads of fur? And this tells us that it seems that the bodices of these gowns could be fur-lined for extra warmth. We certainly know the trains were. So when they did have trains, you could have, if you were very wealthy, your train lined with fur, and you were able to, they seem to be able to hitch it up, probably for practicality's sake. You know, you don't want your train. One of the things we find is that when you get home after a day walking around, your skirts are filthy. So it was very practical to do that, but also it showed everybody that if you could afford to have your skirt of your train lined, you were somebody to be reckoned with. So we see the bodice lined with fur here, which must be very snuggly indeed. I think we're probably on to sleeves. So I'm ready to have my sleeves. So again, this was a bit of a revelation to me. I didn't realise that Tudors had false sleeves. So the French gown this is the main sleeve that you see here, and what's happening is that my false sleeve is being laced into place. Now, just for pure practicality's purpose, my cuff is actually sewn into this, but as you've seen on the previous pictures, actually, you know, it was the cuff of the smock that tended to be seen beneath the chemise. There is a huge amount of debate as to whether this was actually smock poking through, or whether they actually did sew in bits of material, because I know quite a lot of reenactors who've tried to wear this type of sleeve with the smock, and what happens is the smock just disappears all the time, and you don't get these lovely sort of puffs of fabric. I'll just see if it shows better. A little bit like you can see with Princess Elizabeth there. It just sinks in and you're losing it and you're forever sort of pulling it out, and it's highly irritating. And I can imagine that, you know, maybe they did have like a false smock that peeked through. Sorry, I just need to go back slightly. So a little bit on the evolution of the sleeve. So in the 1520s we see a typical sleeve mated pleated material, but what was common was always this slashing along the underside, and that was caught together with eglets. And if I can just show you a little bit, if we move on to this picture of Jane Seymour, we've got a very similar sleeve. It's quite close fitting to the arm, again mated with pleated material, but this time you can see the bejewelled aglets that are clipping the materials together, and you can see our version of aglets here. And these were part of a lady's jewellery and were, you know, was extremely costly, highly bejewelled. And if we move on a little bit to the 1540s, if you recall, I was talking to you about how the sleeve evolved, and here you can really see this in the picture of Princess Elizabeth, how the sleeve is much more voluminous and it looks stiffened almost. And certainly sort of increasingly obvious as part of the decoration of the gown. And again, always highly bejewelled. And again, you can see example of how the material of the false sleeve is matching the material of the kirtle or the forepart. So, I think I am hoodless, aren't I?
We can go for the English.
I think we'll talk about hoods. It's a wardrobe error. My hood has been left elsewhere. Never mind. Actually, Zarina, you can model your hood, actually. So the next layer of clothing would be the hood. Absolutely essential piece of wear. I think there's a passage in the Bible, I think it's in Corinthians, which stated that a woman should not show her hair. And that then had the profound effect of determining how the headgear that women wore throughout Christendom during the medieval period. A woman would have her hair long, of course. The only time she was permitted to wear it loose was if she was a child, a girl, unmarried woman, basically, or she was the Queen of England on her coronation day. So you would need no hood, because obviously the crown would have been placed upon your head instead. Other than that, a married lady always wore her hair up and covered with headgear. In the 1530s, there are basically two different styles of headgear. You've got the English hood here. This particular style of hood, in one form or another, had been around through the 15th century. It tended to have those really long pieces that you might have seen in the portraits of Elizabeth of York. Obviously that's gone now, but you still get this, all the hair is clearly swept away. It's not visible, it's quite stark. And if you want to just, can you just, we've got an English hood here. A beautiful English hood. So again, I'll come up and play it, maybe somebody wants to wear it. So yeah, so you can see how the hair is really swept up, kept out of the way. And I have to say, I've tried these English hoods myself. It tends to age me by about 10 years. There's something quite severe, as you can see here. It's quite severe, isn't it? So you can see when the French hood came in, and why it was so risque, because you can actually see part of the hair. As you can see with Zarina here, you can see her hair under her French hood. So yeah, very, very risque indeed. And of course Jane Seymour, after Anne Boleyn's execution, took back to the English hood because she wanted to wash her hands of anything Anne, anything French, and she wanted to be seen as absolutely English and absolutely proper. So she really was known for wearing her English hoods. So I'm sorry, I'm going to be hoodless. My apologies to you. But now we're on for the fight. We're nearly there, but I'm looking rather plain, aren't I? So I need a bit of bling. I need a bit of chewed bling to brighten up the costume. Now, a lady's parure of jewels in the Tudor period would have consisted of her habiliments. So this is the sort of the habiliment, and you can see it on the left-hand side there. You have a picture of Mary Tudor in her wedding portrait with Charles Brandon. She's wearing the most amazing costume. It's so beautiful. But you can see the billements around the edge of her hood. And they would always match with her castanet, which is the Tudor word for a necklace. So that typically would be 2 strands. You'd have the choker, worn very close around the base of the neck, as you can see here, and then a longer necklace that would dip away beneath the neckline. Pendant, of course, was very popular. And you can see also the bejeweling around the edge of the gown itself. Now, I have that sewn into this gown. Again, I've actually, there seems to be, now to me that edging on Mary Tudor seems to be actually built into the gown itself, but it looks slightly different in this portrait of Jane Seymour, and I think it's widely held that the jewellery stitched in around the neckline was actually stitched into the kirtle and not onto the gown itself. So you can actually see where Jane's red gown ends, and then the jewels kind of sit above it. So they must be sewn onto her kirtle. And again, you can see her chemise, which is just lined with the black embroidery there. And while we're here, by the way, I talked to you about the front lacing French gown, and if you had a front lacing French gown, you'd have to wear a stomacher to cover up the lacing. And here you can see with Jane, if you see the little pins just down the side there, I thought to be the stomacher that she's wearing in place. The other pieces of part of a parure of jewellery for a lady would be her girdle belt. Would you like to fix my girdle belt on? I'm feeling bereft without my pearls. I'll just hold it in place. So a girdle belt, which was a very expensive piece of jewellery, again absolutely often highly bejewelled. You could have a tassel on the end, a crucifix, a pendant, a pomander, so you could keep away the smells. If you so wish, you could just sort of sit with your pomander whenever it was getting a little bit too smelly. I've also heard that rings could also have scent in them, so you could just sort of delicately lift the ring to your nose if you wanted to keep any foul smells away. This is a long piece of... There we go. So, excuse me a moment, I just have to adjust my pearls. And then the final thing would be the 2 bracelets. If you can see, Mary Tudor here has 2 bejewelled bracelets, so very often they had a pair of bracelets that they would wear at the cuff. And obviously a multitude of rings, that goes without saying. And I think we are probably, yes, getting to the end. So I'm apart from my hood, I am pretty much fully dressed and ready to go. So this is how a lady of the 1530s would gradually build up her wardrobe and get ready for her day at court. And I'm very happy to take any questions that you might have, or if you want to touch any of the fabrics or want to know anything else, we're certainly happy to answer any questions for you. And we will be staying around. I do have some copies of the books if anybody is interested in purchasing them, and Zarina will be here to talk to you about Tudor gowns and any of your tutoring needs if you're absolutely now dying to buy yourself a Tudor gown for Christmas.
Taking you have a tailor-made, of course.
I have to give a health warning though. If you have one made, you won't stop. I now currently have 4, and they are so voluminous, they sort of take up more and more of your wardrobe space, and my 21st century clothes are being progressively confined to a smaller bit of the wardrobe. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Did you go hunting in that outfit?
Do you know, the hunting question is a really interesting one, because I searched high and low when I was doing the book to try and find out what ladies wore when they hunted. It's so difficult to imagine that you could hunt in this. I mean, you can't actually raise your hands that far above your head. You know, we have done archery in these costumes, so you can certainly do archery.
Falconry, Milady.
And we've done falconry. But if you imagine the saddles, I don't know whether you've seen a saddle from the... I mean, there is one that exists, I think it's in Stratford, and it's got this tiny little saddle. There's not even, you know, the horn that they have with the Victorian saddle. They didn't even have that in the 1530s. So perching on these horses. I don't know how they did it. The only thing I've seen is that there's a woodcut of Elizabeth I, who's, I think, about sort of, you know, doing the honours. There's a stag that's been killed, and she's wearing a sort of a you know, very formal gown like this. I think it's more of an English gown, but it's quite fitted. There seems to be a real paucity of information about what they wore to hunt, and I have asked all sorts of different people who do reenactment and, you know, do a lot of stuff with Tudor clothes, and yeah, I haven't got a satisfactory answer, but it's difficult to imagine, really. But then again, their hunting was quite different as well. So, you know, when we see hunts galloping across the countryside, their hunts were more managed. So there was a sort of I can't remember the name, but it was like a chief huntsman. They'd find the stags, and then they'd drive them in front of where they were waiting. So there's an account with Anne hunting with, I think it's the French ambassador sometime in the early 1530s, and it literally talks about the deer being driven in front of them with a crossbow, so they just sort of stood there. So I don't think they always went out hunting at a pace, even though it'd be quite nice to think
Sat
that
on
was
the horse.
maybe just sat delicately on the horse. Yeah, exactly. So and same with falconry. They would cast the bird off from the fist, but obviously they didn't go after what happened. You know, they had falconers who ran into the hedgerows and caught the prey and did all of that. So it was all very much sort of, you know,
A lot of posing went on.
a lot. Yes, that's why we enjoy it. Do a lot of posing. Yeah, so yeah, a lot of posing. But you know, and the dancing. You know, the pavane, such a stately dance. But when you're wearing these dresses, you begin to immediately understand, you know, why they danced in that way. It was, and you get this beautiful movement with the skirts when you start to move. It's just, you know, I mean, we've been stood fairly static, but they have a lovely sort of sway and swish to them as you walk around. And when you're dancing and you do that kind of step for dancing, the skirts really move beautifully.
Would they keep the waist quite comfortable? They didn't pull you right
No,
in,
they didn't.
as you say, much later in
No.
Victorian times.
No, they weren't meant to constrict the waist. It was just meant to give you that lovely definition and the raised bust, really. And they are comfortable. I mean, people often say, gosh, they must be so comfortable. But once you're laced in, your body does seem to accommodate to it. And it gives you a lovely posture. There's no slouching around, like, you know. You have to really hold yourself very elegantly. It really, you know, lends itself to elegance and grace. Oh, that's what we love about them. I'm still waiting to go to. My life ambition is to go to Waitrose dressed like this, just for fun.
So when the ladies were pregnant, did they just let them get looser?
Good point.
Yeah.
I've even got a slide for you on that. There we go. Pregnant ladies for you. So, yes, they let out the laces of the gown, and that's what you'll read about. You know, the laces were let out. And they quite often inserted an extra panel of material, which was called a stomacher, I believe. It's the same thing, although it's worn slightly differently here. And yeah, that's what they did. They just kept, as far as I can tell, they just let out the lace of the gown, and they put in the additional material. And, what they did with other intimate ladies' needs is a little bit more perplexing.
Well, I've heard, of course, maybe from other women, but people were pregnant for so many years and maybe feeding, that they didn't have the ladies' problems.
That's got to go, but yes. Yeah, I mean, that's true. I mean, you know, when you do the research into the Tudor families, as I did for LTV, and I was trying to work out who's, you know, LTV Le Temps Viendra, I always call it LTV for short. You know, you're constantly coming across massive families of 10 plus and more, and then some. And yeah, I mean, it just seems to be an annual round of just being pregnant, really. So yeah, unless you were Anne Boleyn, bless her. Yeah. So yeah. Anybody else?
Well, I've got another costume question, but it's about the men's clothing.
Oh yes.
Can you remind me? We had a talk a few weeks ago about what men wore. And you know the big baggy pants that Henry VIII wore? And they had a really strange name. She told us, and I can't remember it. Something like a Kindle. So it's a really, really weird name.
Well, I have to hold my hands up and say I
You
confess
don't
I'm
know
not
that
an you know,
No.
I know much less about men's clothes, and they're equally mystifying. But they were often a doublet and hose.
Yes.
But,
Well, this was a doublet and hose with the stocking,
was-
but it was the panty bits.
They called
No,
those
they're
hose
they
too.
call them
They
hose
put
too.
anything.
Yeah, they called those hose too.
Yeah,
Well, she gave us a really strange
but they
name.
could be. You see, that's
Yeah,
that's
well,
the
they should
confusion.
say, There's lots
You
of names.
you do get different names for the
Yeah.
same item of clothing.
Probably local names as well.
Well,
Possibly.
yeah, who knows? Yeah.
How well do your stockings stay up? Or do they
Actually, these are okay. I mean, yeah, I wish I'd brought the picture of Eleanor Toledo's stockings, but I mean, they just, they look very like this. And at the moment, these are absolutely, they're staying up fine. But my garter's gone on this. Obviously, I've got elastic. I always have elastic. But with the garter tied in place, but it's actually quite uncomfortable. I find that actually, funnily enough, the whole thing I wear. It's actually the garters I find most uncomfortable because they're tied so tightly around your leg. It causes your leg to
no
ache.
give, have they?
No, there is no give. Yeah, and you have to keep them quite tight to keep them up. And I'm sure without any elastic, they had to do that to keep the stockings up. Otherwise, they would have been around their ankles. I mean, as you saw, I lost my garter as I came in. I've lost my garter doing dancing and all sorts as well. I mean, I suppose as a Tudor person at court, you wouldn't want to be losing your garters around the place.
So even their outdoor shoes wouldn't be terribly heavy.
I don't
So
know.
there again, they wouldn't really get very mucky when they were outside, would
No,
they?
I mean I think they did have boots. They did wear boots. Again, I was trying to research hunting attire for the novel I was writing, and the lady I was talking to about that said, they would have a sort of short boot. And I know later in the century they certainly did. I mean, there's a beautiful pair of boots of Elizabeth I. It's got all the buttons up the side. It's just exquisite, with heels and the works. But I think they did have boots, and probably boots for riding. But
And I think, obviously the Queen wouldn't, but if people went walking out in the streets, they had these sort of wooden kind of pattern things, didn't they?
to raise them off the
Raise them off the ground, and
donk
also
on the ground.
and also to keep their shoes off the
Yeah.
ground.
Those nasty things on the ground.
Wonderful.
So what age would a young girl be put into clothes like this?
Oh, quite early. I mean, the little children were like little miniatures.
Well, the
of their-
picture we've got of the little six-year-old.
Yeah, I thought that was just because
It's
they
like
was
a
a
little
betrothal.
Elizabeth.
No, I think
a 6-year-old wandering around in that.
No, I think they would. They didn't have children's clothing. Once I think they were out of their nappies, they were into.
Oh, didn't the boys wear sort of dresses until
They
they were
did.
about 6?
Yeah. Yes, they did.
There's a reason
Yeah.
for that, wasn't it? They had-
Absolutely.
they had to
When they
protect
went,
boys.
sorry, when they went riding, did they wear capes and things?
And they did have. I mean, there were
Yes,
items
I
of
have.
clothing. I've
Yeah.
certainly read in the royal accounts, particularly of Henry VIII, of capes and so on. So there were other items of clothing that you could wear around here. I've not talked about those today. And of course, they have the lovely flea furs. Have you heard of the flea furs?
I thought it was fur with fleas.
No, literally, they're almost like they're like a skin of an animal with a head. It's an animal skin, and they wear them around their neck in the hope that the fleas would jump on to the fur and get out of their body. Now, whether it actually worked or not, I don't know. But they were literally called flea furs.
The Zeppelini, isn't they?
And sorry.
Zeppelini.
Yes, I think that's absolutely. And there are portraits. If you look, there are a couple of ladies with their flea furs sort of in their hands, etc.
There's a lot of differences about how clean they kept themselves. Some
Yeah.
say they did wash, some say they didn't wash. Very often, as you say, you've got your garment underneath which you did wash. But their actual bodies, we don't really know about.
No, but I mean, Henry VIII had a bath, didn't? I mean, he had a bath. He had a Bane tower
Yes.
at places like Hampton Court.
Yeah.
I mean, it was unusual. He had piped hot water into his bath. It was like a barrel. It's like a big barrel. So yeah. So I mean, he definitely did bathe. I don't know how
Depends
true that.
what they
No,
do.
I don't. In the river maybe. No.
Mentioned stays.
Yes.
Just for the lower part of the body, or the
No, the stays were the actual sort of what we would call a corset.
yeah, but they would only come up to that.
They come to the waist level,
Yeah.
like basically that
Yeah.
sort of thing.
My mother used to wear like a pink one that wrapped round with hooks and eyes,
Oh really?
and laces down the back. It was called Dante's stays.
Well, there you go. Yeah, there you go.
Comes from, I suppose.
Yeah, things just evolving all the
But
time,
they
aren't
weren't at
they?
the top of her at all. They were just
Right, round the
Yeah.
middle, yeah. Well, they probably, you know, and it's all about shape and definition and support, isn't it? So,
This
Well,
was
they have
before the
bodies
war.
today, don't they? What they call bodies.
Yeah.
Bodies.
bodies.
Not all
Yeah.
in one thing, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
What is this fur for, that on bit?
Ah, do you want to demonstrate my bit of fur? This is a partlet. So ladies could wear, in the summer, they might want to protect their delicate skin from the sun. And in the winter, if they're outside, they might want extra wool. So they would wear something called a partlet. So you will have actually seen this on a lot of portraits, but sometimes it looks like it's part of the dress.
Yes, I've never
And you
realised
don't
it's
realise
two
it's
pieces.
actually a separate piece, which makes it very versatile actually, because it does change. You'll probably see as it goes on, it changes the look of the dress quite significantly, even though you're only wearing quite a small
So everything's
garment.
tied on basically.
This is,
Yes.
everything is just tied into place. And this is fur lined, it's just, it's a godsend when there's wind. I mean,
Yeah.
it just keeps you so warm. I should do my own things up. So this is a partlet. And
If
you,
you're- sorry.
no, please go.
So if your lady in waiting is a lady, she's obviously got lady in waiting.
Yes.
Oh,
So
Way
how
on servants.
far down does it
Yeah,
go
quite.
to a person dressing themselves?
Yeah, well, probably the servants of the ladies in waiting were probably servants and probably kind of went about. They were in the background. They certainly wouldn't attend on their ladies in waiting in the Queen's chambers, although you often hear of servants hanging around the presence chamber. You know, if their masters were eating, they would just sort of hang around in the background. But yes. But you do hear, for example, at Anne Boleyn's coronation procession, you have Anne Boleyn, you have all her ladies in chariots and on horses, and then right at the back you've got the servants of all the ladies who were in chariots and horses. But only one set of servants, that doesn't go for. So that's interesting, isn't it? Because maybe if there's only servants of the ladies, that's where it does stop.
Going back to lacing everything together, I
Yes.
noticed that there was ribbons on your front bits.
There are,
Yes, we
sorry.
would normally
Yeah.
actually just tie those in just to anchor the forepart.
And that would be to the gown.
Yes,
So there's-
yeah. We didn't do that just for
No,
expediency.
no,
but yes.
obviously, and
Yeah.
your sleeves as well. Your extension sleeves. Are they
These
tied
are
round
actually
or do they go into the dress itself?
Which one are you on about? This?
These ones?
The lacy one.
The lacy ones, yes, they're actually tied on with ribbons.
Yeah,
Just
so
round
there's-
it, yes.
You're right.
To
yes.
the dress.
to the dress.
To the actual dress.
Ah,
Yeah, so there's ribbons in the dress, ribbons on the
Yeah.
the sleeve, and then you tie them together.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Interesting.
How are all the little holes where the laces go? What stitching is that finished with?
The buttonhole stitching.
Oh, I thought it probably was, yeah.
I mean, they're actually over a metal eyelet, but in the actual time of production, back in the Tudor times, they would have used little metal rings, sewn together, made a hole, and done a buttonhole stitch over the top of them.
Oh, so they did actually have some kind of metal ring then?
Yeah, they would just have little metal rings. If they had the means. If it was just more simple and peasant, then you would just make literally the hole and then do the buttonhole stitch.
Yeah.
Yes.
When did the fashion of keeping their hair covered finish? Because in some portraits they've got all their hair down.
Yeah.
I really appreciate this probably sort of war ones.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at portraits going on, and again, I don't purport to be an expert on later in the century, but most of the writing I've done has been around the sort of 1520s and 30s. But obviously the hood sort of disappears, you get more caps coming in, you get these Elizabethan, little jaunty Elizabethan caps, and you see a lot of hair there. So I think really by the end of the century, this idea of having to keep the hair covered was gone really, but they still wore head dresses, and it was all part of the ornamentation.
Elizabeth was very proud of her hair.
Yeah,
with
she-
the wigs.
yeah.
She wore a lot of red wigs.
Yeah. And a lot of it was showing. This wasn't it with just little hats and
But I
caps.
think
And,
that the influence, she was a queen, she could do what she liked,
Yeah.
didn't she? So she might have
Set the
decided,
fashions, wouldn't
yeah,
it?
Yeah.
she's not wearing these anymore.
absolutely,
She
yeah.
wanted everyone to see her glorious red hair.
There you go.
Yeah.
We've got some volunteers that can take ladies on a tour of the house
Yes.
to show you the Tudor aspects of the housework and would have visited, and then Sarah and Zarina will still be here to come back in about 20 minutes
Yeah,
and have
no.
a chat and have a look at.
I'll have my hood on then.
It's the first